I didn't yell when my daughter-in-law told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't handle her mother's insults. I just did exactly what she suggested. My name is Rebecca Morgan. I am 65 years old, a widow of 5 years, and I stopped accepting disrespect a long time ago. Before I continue, let me know in the comments, have you subscribed to the channel or not? Tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like there? Does it match your mood today? I'm curious to see how far this story travels. The evening started as a supposed treat. My son Daniel and his wife Patricia invited me to a nice seafood restaurant downtown. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Patricia's mother, Margaret, already sitting in the booth. Margaret was a woman who used sarcasm as both a shield and a weapon. Within 10 minutes, she had critiqued my blouse, asked invasive questions about my late husband's pension, and complained about the restaurant's lighting. Daniel just stirred his drink. He had a habit of fading into the background whenever his wife or her mother took over a room. Patricia sat next to Margaret, sipping her wine and offering a faint, validating smile every time her mother landed a verbal jab. I kept my responses short and neutral. I ordered my meal, focused on the food, and tried to steer the conversation toward safer topics like the weather or their recent home repairs. But Margaret wasn't interested in safe topics. She thrived on making people squirm, and tonight, I was her chosen entertainment. It must be nice, Margaret chuckled, leaning over her half-eaten salmon. Having all that free time, no husband to look after, no real responsibilities? Just puttering around your big empty house while the rest of us work for a living? I set my fork down quietly, wiping my mouth with a napkin. I keep busy, Margaret. Peace and quiet is a privilege I've earned. Patricia rolled her eyes. I knew what was coming next, but I didn't know how far they were willing to push it. Margaret didn't like my answer. She swirled her wine and sighed dramatically. Oh, please. You're just isolated. That's why you always hover around Daniel. It's a little desperate, don't you think? Daniel shifted uncomfortably, staring hard at his plate. Mom's not desperate, Margaret, he muttered. It was a weak defense, barely audible over the restaurant's background noise. Patricia immediately placed a hand on Daniel's arm, silencing him. Then she looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry. It was entirely dismissive. Honestly, Rebecca, you take things way too seriously. Mom is just joking. Insults aren't jokes, Patricia, I replied evenly. They're just rude. That was when Patricia dropped her smile. She leaned forward, locking eyes with me. If you don't like my mother's sarcastic jokes, you can pay the bill and leave. She expected me to shrink. She expected me to lower my gaze, apologize for ruining the mood, and silently endure the rest of the dessert menu. Instead, I smiled. You know what, Patricia? That is an excellent idea, I said. I signaled the waiter who was passing by. I handed him my credit card and asked him to put the entire table's check on it. Daniel looked up, confused. Patricia looked triumphant, assuming I was just paying to keep the peace. When the waiter returned, I signed the receipt, put my card in my purse, and stood up. I slid my coat over my shoulders. Thanks for dinner, Mom, Daniel said tentatively. You're welcome, I answered. By the way, I'm driving myself home. Since you two rode with me, you'll need to figure out an Uber. I didn't wait for their reaction. I just walked out into the cool evening air. I had left them at the table, but my next move would leave them entirely on their own. My phone rang at 8 o'clock the next morning. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a cup of black coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. The screen displayed Daniel's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Mom, Daniel started, his voice thick with frustration. What was that last night? You completely embarrassed us. An Uber cost me $40 and Patricia is furious. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Good morning, Daniel. I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. He groaned. Come on, Mom. You know she didn't mean you should literally abandon us there. You blew it out of proportion. I did exactly what she suggested, I stated. She told me to pay and leave. I did both. I'm not sure why she's upset when I followed her instructions. You can't just act like that, he argued. You need to apologize to her and to Margaret. They think you had a tantrum. I didn't raise my voice once. I pointed out that I paid for a very expensive meal and excused myself from a situation where I was being disrespected. There will be no apology, Daniel. Mom, Patricia said she doesn't want you coming over until you say sorry. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. That works perfectly for me. Enjoy your weekend, Daniel. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't cry. I didn't sit there agonizing over whether I was a bad mother. Instead, I walked back inside and opened my laptop. If Patricia wanted space, she was going to get it. And if they wanted to act like independent adults who didn't need me, it was time their finances reflected that reality. For years, I had kept a few things running quietly in the background for Daniel. When he was in college, I added him to my family cell phone plan. When he married Patricia, she got added too. I also paid for their auto insurance policy, a habit born from when Daniel was an intern and barely making rent. It was a few hundred a month. It had never bothered me, but the disrespect certainly did. Why should I fund the lifestyle of people who viewed me as a punchline? I logged into my mobile carrier portal. It took exactly 4 clicks to separate Daniel and Patricia's phone lines from my master account. The system prompted me that their service would be suspended by midnight unless they added their own payment method. I confirmed the change. Next, I opened my insurance provider's website. I removed Daniel's truck and Patricia's sedan from my policy. I requested an email confirmation for the cancellation. It arrived in my inbox a minute later. I didn't send them a warning text. I didn't write a dramatic email explaining my actions. If they were old enough to dictate who was allowed to be respected at a dinner table, they were old enough to pay their own bills. I spent the rest of the day gardening. I pulled weeds, repotted my ferns, and enjoyed the sunshine. It was peaceful. The knot of anxiety that usually formed in my chest after spending time with Patricia and her mother was completely gone. By Tuesday afternoon, the changes took effect. I knew exactly when it happened because Daniel couldn't call me. He had to drive to my house instead. I watched his truck pull into my driveway, wondering how he would handle the sudden reality check. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when Daniel knocked on the front door. He didn't wait for me to answer, using his spare key to walk right in. His face was red and he held his smartphone up like a piece of evidence. My phone stopped working, he announced. Patricia's too. And I got an email from the insurance company saying our coverage was dropped. Did your cards get hacked? I dried my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. No, Daniel. Nothing was hacked. I removed you from my accounts. He stared at me, blinking. What? Why? Because you are 30 years old, I replied simply. You have a full-time job. Patricia has a job. It's time you manage your own expenses. This is about the dinner, isn't it? He demanded, his voice rising. You're doing this to get back at Patricia. I'm doing this because I realized I'm financing people who tolerate me at best and insult me at worst, I said calmly. I'm not angry, Daniel. I'm just adjusting my budget. We don't have the money to just take on these bills out of nowhere, he protested. You could have warned us. You have savings, I reminded him. And you have your paychecks. You will figure it out. He paced across the kitchen floor, running a hand through his hair. Patricia is going to lose her mind when I tell her it was intentional. That is between you and your wife, I answered. Now, unless you came over just to discuss phone plans, I have a casserole in the oven. Daniel left without another word, slamming the front door behind him. I went back to cleaning my counters. The house was quiet again, and I felt a profound sense of relief. The next morning, I expected Patricia to call, perhaps from her office phone. Instead, she chose a more aggressive tactic. I was reading a book in my armchair when I heard heavy footsteps on the porch, followed by a sharp, demanding knock. I walked to the front door and opened the solid wood panel, but I kept the heavy metal screen door locked. Patricia stood on the porch, holding her purse tightly. Behind her stood Margaret, wearing a smug expression. They had come as a team to put me in my place. "Open the door, Rebecca," Patricia demanded. "We need to talk." "We can talk right here," I said, looking at them through the mesh screen. Margaret scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Let us in. You're acting like a child locking us out." "It's my house, Margaret. I decide who comes inside," I answered. "What do you want, Patricia?" Patricia glared at me. "You cutting off our phones and insurance is petty and vindictive. You're punishing Daniel because you don't like me." I removed financial support that I was providing out of generosity, I corrected her. Generosity requires mutual respect. You made it clear at dinner that respect isn't on the menu. So, I took my generosity elsewhere. "You're tearing this family apart over a joke," Patricia insisted. "No," I replied smoothly. "I am setting a boundary. How you choose to react to it is your business, but you will not come to my home to bully me." Before Patricia could launch into another argument, I stepped back. "Have a good day, ladies." I closed the heavy wooden door, turned the deadbolt, and walked back to my armchair. I could hear Patricia complaining loudly on the porch for another minute before their footsteps retreated. They had tried to push, and the door didn't budge. A week passed in complete silence. I didn't reach out to Daniel, and he didn't reach out to me. During that time, I found myself walking through my 4-bedroom house, really looking at it for the first time in years. It was too big. The property taxes were high, and cleaning the empty rooms was a chore I no longer enjoyed. More importantly, I knew Daniel and Patricia had plans for this house. I had heard them whispering at Thanksgiving about how they could renovate the kitchen when they moved in. They saw my home as their future asset, a safety net they didn't have to earn. I picked up the phone and called a real estate agent. Within 2 days, a nice woman named Claire was walking through my living room, taking notes. She told me the market was incredibly competitive and my house would sell in days. I signed the listing agreement that same afternoon. I spent the weekend packing up the guest rooms. I focused entirely on Daniel's old belongings, his high school yearbooks, his baseball trophies, boxes of comic books he had left in my attic for a decade. I stacked them neatly in the garage. I didn't need to consult my son about selling my property. The deed was in my name alone. The equity belonged to me. I started looking at smaller properties online, condos closer to the city, places with a garden but no grass to mow. I felt lighter with every box I taped shut. I was dismantling the safety net they took for granted, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I was designing a future that belonged only to me. The for sale sign went up in my front yard on a Tuesday. On Wednesday afternoon, Daniel showed up. He didn't use his key this time. He rang the doorbell. I opened the door wearing an old t-shirt and holding a roll of packing tape. Daniel stared at me, pale and wide-eyed. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front yard. "What is that?" he asked. "It's a sign, Daniel. I'm selling the house," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He walked into the hallway, looking at the stacks of cardboard boxes. "You can't sell the house. This is the family home. Patricia and I were talking about moving in next year to help you maintain it. I don't need help maintaining it, I said. I'm buying a smaller place. A condo. Daniel pulled out his phone. He had evidently set up a new plan and called Patricia. I could hear her panicked voice through the speaker. Put her on the phone, Patricia demanded. Daniel handed the phone to me. Rebecca, what are you doing? Patricia yelled. You're throwing away Daniel's inheritance. You can't just sell it without talking to us. Patricia, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I am very much alive. I do not have an inheritance to give yet. I have a house, and I am choosing to sell it to fund my retirement. You're doing this just to spite me, she accused. I don't think about you nearly enough to base my financial decisions on you, I answered honestly. I handed the phone back to Daniel. There are 3 boxes of your things in the garage, Daniel, I told him. Please take them today. He looked utterly defeated as he walked toward the garage. The reality had finally set in. The house sold in 4 days to a lovely young couple. A month later, moving day arrived. I had hired professional movers to transport my furniture to the new condo. I was standing in the empty driveway, holding a final box of cleaning supplies, when Daniel's truck pulled up. Patricia was in the passenger seat. They got out and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the empty house. Patricia's face was tight with resentment. She realized the financial cushion she had been banking on was completely gone. There would be no free house. There would be no more paid bills. I can't believe you actually did it, Patricia muttered, crossing her arms. You're going to be awfully lonely in a condo all by yourself. I looked at her, adjusting my grip on the box. I would rather be lonely in my own space than surrounded by people who treat me poorly in my own home. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, looking ashamed. Do you need help with anything, Mom? No, the movers handled it all, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I handed it to Daniel. This is my new address. You are welcome to visit me, Daniel, but you must call first. I looked directly at Patricia. And Margaret is never welcome. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but Daniel put a hand up. Stop, Patricia, just stop, he told his wife. It was the first time I had ever heard him shut her down. I walked to my car, put the box in the trunk, and got into the driver's seat. I backed out of the driveway, gave them a polite wave, and drove down the street. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. My new condo was beautiful. It had large windows, a modern kitchen, and a small private patio where I grew herbs and tomatoes in terracotta pots. There were only 2 bedrooms, one for me and one that I turned into a reading room. There was no spare bed for ungrateful guests. It took a few months for the dust to settle. Patricia tried to send a passive-aggressive holiday card, which I promptly recycled. I didn't block her number, but I never initiated contact. Daniel came to visit me on a Sunday afternoon in late spring. He came alone. He brought a box of my favorite pastries and sat with me on the patio. He looked tired, but older somehow, more grounded. It's nice here, Mom, he said quietly, looking at my tomato plants. It is, I agreed, pouring him a cup of coffee. Patricia and I have been arguing a lot, he admitted. Since the house sold? Since we had to start paying our own way entirely, it's been hard. Being an adult usually is, I replied gently. I didn't gloat, and I didn't offer to pay his bills. I just listened. He stayed for an hour. When he got up to leave, he hugged me tightly. I'm sorry about everything, Mom. I really am. I know, Daniel. The door is always open for you, I told him. And I meant it. After he left, I washed the coffee cups and watered my plants. I had lost a big house, but I had gained my peace of mind. I had drawn a line in the sand, and standing on my side of it felt entirely like freedom. Looking back, The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about money or real estate. It was about self-worth. For a long time, I thought keeping the peace meant swallowing my pride and ignoring the subtle jabs. But I realized that true peace doesn't come from tolerating disrespect. It comes from knowing your own boundaries and having the courage to act on them. You don't always need to yell, argue, or explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the most powerful response to toxicity is simply quietly removing your presence, your energy, and your support. We all deserve to feel safe and valued in our own lives, even if we have to build that space entirely on our own. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and listening to my story today. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect your own peace? I'd love to read about your experiences in the comments below. If you found this story relatable or empowering, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow, and I can't wait to share more stories with you in the next video. See you.